Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome back to the Drowzy Historian. As you settle into your comfortable place, let your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench, and your breath lengthen just a little. Maybe the room is dim now, a soft pool of light nearby, the rest of the day already slipping into the distance. Tonight we keep gentle company with a city that has been many things to many people. New Rome, Constantinople, the meeting place of waters, on the last quiet night before its name changes again. Picture, if you will, the simple kindnesses of a city after dusk. A mother cooling bread by an open window. A watchman touching the iron of a gate to feel whether the night is damp. A tired mason leaving his tools in a neat roll, promising the wall he'll be back before dawn. In the streets, voices soften. In the courtyards, lamps make small islands of gold on stone. Not far away, the sea holds the stars like coins in a dark basin. The Golden Horn is at rest. The Bosporus carries a slow conversation between two continents. And the great chain across the harbour floats like a sleeping serpent with iron scales. The city breathes, and for a few hours more, it belongs to itself. This is the last night of Rome, not the marble Rome of childhood stories, not the parade ground Rome of textbooks, but the Rome that learned to speak Greek and pray under a vast dome. The Rome that lived in markets and kitchens and workshops by the water. The empire that began with legions ends with lanterns and whispered blessings. That is how history often closes a chapter, not with an argument, but with people doing ordinary things carefully. If this way of drifting slowly through a story feels like a good place to rest, I'd be glad to have you here again. You can tap subscribe like placing a book on your nightstand, a simple way to find your way back whenever you need a quiet lesson and a gentle voice. For now, let your eyes soften, let your breath settle. We'll move at the pace of the city's own heartbeat. Imagine the walls from within, not as a military diagram, but as a long, steady habit. The bricks keep their posture. The towers square their shoulders to the fields. A sentry walking the parapet runs his palm along stone cool from evening, warm in memory, and he can name the places where the wall still rings true and the places where it sighs. Down by the harbour, ropes creak softly as boats nudge the quays. The chain across the horn, broad as a man's chest, has done its quiet duty for weeks, and tonight it merely floats, watchful and tired. Within the palace precincts, the emperor walks with a measured step. Constantine Palaiologos is not a legend to himself. He is a man counting sacks of grain, studying the faces of men he must ask for one more day of courage, and praying the plain prayers of those who have run out of grand ones. He touches a lintel as he passes, a habit from years earlier, and the wood remembers his hand. Across the lines of tents and trenches, a young sultan studies the same skyline by lamplight, his maps smelling faintly of oil and dust. Mehmed is patient, bronze is patient, time is patient. Ambition, too, has learned to move in careful steps. But the last night belongs to the city more than to its rulers. A monk trims lampwicks and whispers the names of the tired. A baker kneads dough by feel, the way his father taught him, and sets aside a few extra loaves for the men on the wall. A girl ties a red thread around her wrist, a small family charm against bad luck, and then forgets it's there. At a fountain near the Macy, two friends share a cup of water, and a joke too small for the chronicles, but big enough to carry them through their shift. A carpenter checks the lashings on a mantlet. A sailor runs a thumb along a coil of line to find the frayed place before it becomes trouble. None of this will make it into the official story. But without it, there is no story at all. We'll drift soon through Hagia Sophia, where the dome hangs like a low moon, and sound becomes shelter. Tonight, for a little while, old arguments soften and voices mingle, as if they had always been meant to. There is no perfect unity here, only the humankind, full of seams and made with care. Lamps burn steadily. Marble remembers footsteps. The city steadies itself in song. Outside, the batteries sit quiet and terrible, bronze mouths cooling in the dark. Inside, faith, stubborn, ordinary, unshowy, makes a kind of warmth that the night is glad to borrow. As you listen, notice how endings are built from the same materials as beginnings: bread and water, tools and rope, hands and voices, fear and love. Constantinople has worn many crowns: Roman, Christian, Byzantine, and now, at the edge of morning, it wears humility with surprising grace. The sea is near, the fields are near, the people are nearer still. When the first light comes, it will fall on the same thresholds where children play, the same steps cats know by heart, the same stones soldiers have memorized with their boots. If your body wants to rest, let it. You won't miss anything you need. We'll keep the thread for you. If you're awake, breathe with the city. In for 4, out for 6. On the inhale, the cool of stone. On the exhale, the warmth of lamplight. We'll walk the walls together in a moment, but for now, stay with the simple picture of the harbour chain sleeping on black water, and the dome holding the last notes of a hymn. And yes, before we travel further into the night, a small invitation. Subscribe so this place is easy to find, and whisper this episode to someone who might need a calm harbour. Then let the present loosen its grip. We're not in a hurry. History can meet us where we are. Now the city lifts its face to the stars, and the stars do what they have always done. Nothing hurried, nothing loud. Tomorrow will be full of drums and iron and dust. Tonight belongs to breath, to kindness, and to the courage of people who still have chores to finish. Stay with me. When you're ready, we'll step onto the ramparts and look out toward the fields where tents sleep like low hills, and we'll listen for the first small rumour of morning. We come now to the city's calm argument with the world beyond it, the language of stone, water, rope, and iron. Along the landward edge, the Theodosian walls run like a measured sentence across the fields. First the moat, broad as a dry river that can be turned quick to mud, then the lower rampart, an outer voice, and behind it, the higher inner wall with square-shouldered towers that keep the rhythm. These layers are not a boast. They are a habit, tended for centuries by men who learned the wall's moods as a shepherd learns a hillside, where frost lingers, where wind finds a seam, where the ground gives the right kind of echo underfoot. Place your palm, in imagination, on those bricks at twilight. They are cool and faintly dusty. The joints whisper of lime and sand and many repairs. Here a patch brightens the old face. There a timber brace sits snug as an extra rib. On the crown of the wall, the crenellations keep their steady punctuation. Sentries lean into the dusk, measuring distance by sound. Drum, horn, the hollow cough of a great piece being swabbed, each noise a syllable in a long exchange. Stone listens as much as it stands. Turn your gaze to the water. The golden horn curves inward like a patient arm, and across its mouth floats the harbour chain, iron links big as a man's thigh, resting on pontoons and anchored to stout capstans. For weeks it has taught the harbour to say, "Not this way," turning the inner water into a guarded bowl. The chain does not clatter or shine. It is a decision made tangible, heavy and plain, a seam that keeps two fabrics from running together. Inside the barrier, a few hulls drowse against the quays. Ropes creak in a domestic register, the sound you hear in courtyards where laundry dries. Up the strait to the north, a younger set of stones grips the Bosporus. A fortress raised the previous year narrows the sea road like a thumb on a reed, instructing ships to mind their manners. Its towers still hold the smell of new mortar. Its arrow slits and gun ports stare at the channel with an unblinking teacher's patience. Geography can be a soft authority until someone gives it walls. Then it becomes unanswerable. With that strong hand on the throat of the waterway, grain and aid are made to move to a different rhythm. Now the new grammar, bronze and powder, bore and shot, the art of making thunder speak in a focused way. Great guns sit on timber beds, their carriages chalked and lashed, their muzzles dark as springs in shade. Powder comes up from wagons in careful measures. Round stone shot, kissed with tallow, waits in cradles. Crews move with cook-like precision. Not a dram too much, not a moment too soon. A spark takes, lungs pause. Earth memorizes the shove. Sound rolls outward like a low hill you can feel rise under your sternum. After the roar, the gun sighs smoke and heat, and men with swabs and ladles step forward as if tending a furnace that can both feed and bite. Old masonry learns this new language one blow at a time. The first day leaves scuffs and chips. The second, a shallow dish where the wall's face begins to tire. The third, a deeper bruise whose edges flake. Defenders answer with sacks of earth that drink shock, with timber ribs that help tired stones carry their load. Mortar is mixed by lantern and carried in small, urgent pails. Masons do arithmetic with their fingertips, gauging how much weight a patch can ask a night to hold. The wall becomes a patient under many hands. The breathing checked, the pulse tapped, the dressing changed before dawn. Beyond the guns, another argument goes on beneath the skin of the earth. Sappers move forward under mantlets and screens, their tools civilized. Pick, wedge, short spade, yet devoted for now to intimate quarrels. Tunnels creep toward foundation stones. Stanchions go in with a carpenter's care. Fires are kindled to weaken supports. Smoke threaders back to tell on itself. Above them, defenders lie with ears pressed to the masonry, feeling for a tremor that doesn't belong to wind or footfall, marking the spot where a countermine must meet its opposite. These are rooms no chronicle draws, brief, low, with breath-catching dust, and when men meet there, the earth keeps their secrets. The siege has its own modest inventory. Oxen pull shot from streambeds to batteries. Wheelwrights listen to hubs and spokes the way doctors listen to hearts. Ropes must be pitched and warmed, or they sulk and stretch at the wrong moment. Buckets, ladders, nails, wedges, humble nouns that, added together, make a verb large enough to move armies. On the city's side, the same nouns are divided like careful bread. A coil kept for the mantlet, a plank for the brace, a barrel for wet sand, a jar of oil for lamps that must not cough out at midnight. Not every day is thunder. Some are geometry. Gunners creep their beds forward inches at a time, recalculating angles by the way dust slants when the sun returns, setting wedges as a tailor sets pins in a hem. A captain of engineers squints along a plumb line and murmurs to a junior about the way old brick spools when struck obliquely, not square. This is knowledge born of bruised fingers and the humility to watch. Across the field, a mason at the parapet thumps a course with the heel of his hand and nods, pleased at the new bond. 2 schools, 2 syllabaries, one shared respect for materials that will only do what they understand. There are moments when the new tricks the old. One day, the city looks up to find masts where none should be. Ships hauled over greased timbers from the Bosporus into the sheltered Horn, a feat half fable, half carpentry, entirely patient. The chain still holds its line, but the water behind it now has company. Batteries swivel, patrols reassign, and the wall adds a new clause to its long sentence. Surprise in a siege is rarely a shout. It is a revision you can point at in the morning. Listen at dusk when the big pieces fall silent to cool, and crews stretch fingers burn through gloves. The wall speaks then in smaller voices. The brush of sandbags against stone, the scrape of trowels, the polite knock of wooden mauls coaxing braces into place. A runner brings wedges cut to a particular angle because a captain remembered a place where grain ran in the brick just so. A boy with a jar of water works the line, offering sips like a tiny priest offering a sacrament. In the moat, carts crunch and settle. On the far bank, timber creaks as frames reset for dawn. Water, too, takes a side, really, both sides, and teaches the same lesson. In cisterns, coolness keeps tempers from fraying. At the batteries, buckets stand ready for sponges and for sparks that need a scolding. Tar listens in its pots, thick and acrid, asked to be both light and lash. Even wind is recruited, sails as shelter on wheeled towers, canvas as quick shade for powder that hates glare. The city and the encampment both caught the weather, and the weather remains courteous, but non-committal. When the great bronze mouths find their note, it is not a continuous shout, but a chant. Load, tamp, aim, fire. Swab, sponge, breathe, wait. The crews learn to count heartbeats between thunder and impact. The defenders learn to hear the difference between a stone that cracks grudgingly and a stone that is ready to leave. In one sector, repeated strokes make a slope of rubble. Suddenly ladders and men have a place to argue at closer range. Hooks leap, spears flash, shouts braid with drum. Then the push thins, the slope settles, and night returns with its usual manners. Under all the noise, attention is the working virtue. The wall stands because eyes noticed a drift in a joint before it became a grin. The batteries speak because someone favoured a wedge by a finger's width. The chain holds because a boatswain with a quiet temper checked a pin he has checked every evening of his working life. This is the grammar of endurance. Small, exact acts, repeated without romance until they add up to something large enough to be called fate. As you breathe with this rhythm, let your shoulders loosen. The city has not yet yielded. The field has not yet tired. The water keeps its counsel. Stone and iron have exchanged their first full paragraphs, and the night, when it arrives, is filled with the soft syllables of repair. In the next hour, we'll leave materials for faces, captains and carpenters, monks and merchants, those who turn walls into work and resolve into supper shared on a parapet, the human chorus that keeps the grammar from becoming only a diagram. Names steady a wall better than mortar, so we linger with the people who make the parapet human. Giovanni Giustiniani walks the line with a carpenter's patience, the sort that prefers tapping a beam to giving a speech. He reads the wall by touch and by ear, as if the stones were an instrument that needs tuning after every loud song. Where the slope of debris near St. Romanus looks treacherous, he puts himself there, not to be seen, but to see. He measures the hour by how often the men reach for water and how quickly a joke travels. Competence, in him, is a kind of warmth. The emperor keeps pace beside him in a quieter orbit. Constantine Palaiologos has the face of a man keeping two ledgers, grain and courage, and trying to make the columns meet. He asks questions that have the mercy of being short. Where do we brace next? Who has slept least? What tool did you run out of first? Men answer without embroidery, because he has earned their plainness. He thanks them by name, and when he forgets a name, he remembers a father or a brother. He does not promise the impossible, promises made without room for windsnap. He prefers knots that give a little understrain. Around these two, the city's braid tightens. Greek masons, Genoese crossbowmen, Venetian sailors, islanders from Chios and Naxos, even a few Catalans, whose curses make people grin despite themselves. The languages mix like streams that have always meant to meet. A young archer named Nicetas checks the fletching on a handful of shafts and places them in neat pairs. An older crossbowman from Pera shows him how to breathe on the last finger width before release. Their words stumble, but skill translates. Food is the first ally every afternoon. A pot of lentils, thickened with a handful of barley and a leaf of something aromatic, does more for morale than a sermon. Bread passes hand to hand. Olives come pinched from a shared pouch. A monk with dust on his cuffs moves along the walkway, touching shoulders with a blessing that never exceeds a sentence. The blessing lands lighter because it does not try to lift more than a man can carry. Someone produces dried figs, another laughs at the audacity, and for a few minutes the wall feels like a high terrace with a view. Tension exists, as it must. A Venetian pilot mutters that the Genoese count ladders like coin. A Genoese swears the Venetians could bargain with a thundercloud. A Greek captain says what everyone knows, that the wall wants hands more than opinions. When a breach widens under the noon sun, the grumbling evaporates like water on hot stone. Sandbags arrive, timber follows, a brace is set, and the wall absorbs another mood swing of the day. On a wind-bent afternoon, Giustiniani stops at a section where the parapet's teeth have been chipped. He runs a palm over the stone as if soothing a horse. A mason named Marcos appears with tools that have the serenity of being used daily. Trowel, line, wooden mallet, a bucket of mortar whose surface looks like the skin of milk. Marcos sets his apprentice to tapping the course from below while he mends from above. A duet learned in quieter years and performed now with the care of habit. Giustiniani steps back only when the rhythm finds itself. Leadership here is less command than contour. Across the water in Galata, lamps wink on as the sun lowers and the town's heart pulls in two directions. Traders live by balance, and this balance is cruel. Sympathy for neighbours across the Horn, fear of offending a power whose reach grows daily. Some young men solve the equation by volunteering at night. They cross in a skiff with oars wrapped in cloth, carrying coils of rope and a bundle of wedges, repair the place they have adopted, and slip back before dawn with brick dust tucked in their sleeves like a secret. Their fathers pretend not to notice and count grain more carefully the next day. We pause beneath Hagia Sophia's inland moon when evening gathers. The city, famously divided in its theology, tries unity on like a shawl borrowed from a patient friend. Latin priests and Greek deacons stand within a few paces of one another, each aware of the other's silences. Tonight, the practice of standing together matters more than the theory of how to name what is above. The hymn is familiar to both sides in different clothing. By the second verse, clothing does its old wise thing and becomes less important. A woman whose uncle swore never to set foot in a union service finds herself in the aisle. Her hands empty of baskets, her eyes full. The dome, old diplomat, keeps everyone's tone within the bounds of kindness. Back at the ramparts, the union expresses itself in tools. A Venetian ropesman replaces a lash with a knot the Greeks have not used. A Greek carpenter shows a Genoese how to wedge a brace so it will release under load rather than splinter. A small trick that saves fingers later. A rope passes down the line, hand to hand, without fuss. It is a sacrament of the wall, administered in coils. The emperor's rounds shift to the places where nerves are frayed thin. He has a few words he uses the way a smith uses oil, sparingly, to quiet friction. You have done enough for this hour. This section will hold because you held. Sleep is not surrender. It is ammunition. He leaves a silence behind him that is strangely restful, like the air after rain. Giustiniani, by contrast, leaves instructions behind him that resemble recipes. Exact, repeatable, forgiving only when the cook is tired. 5 to sand, 2 to timber. Rotate at the second bell. Water every man who forgets to ask. Even small sport keeps a line from hardening. A Greek sentry bets a Genoese that he can balance a stone on a merlin until the bell. He wins and offers the prize, a fig, to a boy running messages rather than eating it himself. The boy pockets it and runs faster. A sailor shows a landsman how to read wind on canvas, and then pretends not to notice when the landsman teaches him how to anchor a hinge so a door won't squeal. They are building a shared vocabulary, one hinge, one fig at a time. As the light thins, a skiff moves along the inner side of the Horn, hugging the shadow under the chain. The oars speak in a domestic rhythm: dip, pull, breathe, lift, the same beat used for sweeping a courtyard or kneading bread. The boat carries messages, a coil of new line, and 3 loaves a baker could not resist adding. The baker has written nothing on them, but the shape says what it needs to say. I am thinking of you. On the wall, the loaves vanish into men who suddenly remember they are hungry in the most polite way. We linger with a final small thing. A crossbowman's string phrase. He curses softly, embarrassed by the intimacy of fear that such a small failure invites. A monk, who repaired sandals before he took orders, takes the bow without a word and reties the serving with precise fingers. He hands it back and nods at the man's eyes, not the weapon. You will do. The sentence is ordinary and enormous. It leaves the archer standing a little taller and aiming a little steadier when the next call comes. Night folds over the parapet. Lamps bloom along the walkway. Powder is tucked under canvas. Wedges are stacked where hands will find them in the dark. The human braid that held the wall through daylight now pulls tight for the quiet hours, mending, rationing, watching, singing under breath to keep fear polite. The city sleeps in patches as a field sleeps under stars. Tomorrow, the argument with bronze resumes. Tonight, the argument is with weariness and the allies: bread, water, names spoken correctly, tools placed where they belong, are strong. Breathe with that steadiness. We have met the faces that make the wall more than geometry. Next, we move into the long pulse that wears even stone thin and yet keeps time with human patience. Days of thunder, nights of repair, and the strange tenderness that survives between the hammer strokes. Dawn returns like a measured knock, and the batteries answer first. The great piece near the gate of St. Romanus clears its throat with a blast that makes the wall remember everything it has learned since April. The way mortar loosens in plates, the way dust moves before stone, the way men lean into the parapet without quite knowing they've leaned. Smaller guns speak in phrases between the big sentences, probing for the line where yesterday's bruise has turned to today's weakness. The day begins as it has begun for weeks. Thunder, pause, thunder again, and a thin rain of grit settling into hair and beards until everyone wears the same color. Within the city, the counterpoint is ready. Runners tug on sleeves and turn corners with the strange politeness of urgency. Barrels of water stand at intervals like punctuation marks. A boy whose job is to keep cups filled attends to his route as if it were a prayer. Masons touch the wall the way a physician touches a forearm to find a pulse. Where a crack now smiles a little wider, they mark it with chalk and a quiet promise to return at dusk with braces and sand. A carpenter points with 2 fingers, and men who were about to lift a beam change sides without discussion. Balance matters more than strength when time is tight. By the 3rd hour, the air tastes of salt, heat, and a faint sweetness from powder. A sallyport opens like a breath, and a small party slips into the space between lines. Hooks bite at gabions. A pair of axes worry at a mantlet's ribs. Archers braid their shots with a rhythm learned by repetition. 3 quick, 2 measured, pause. The enemy answer is equally practiced. A rush to intimidate, a shrug of pikes to discourage, bolts with bright veins whispering past ears. The sortie folds home, carrying one man whose ankle has forgotten how to be trustworthy, and another who is oddly calm about a shallow cut that looks worse than it will be. On the rampart, hands meet them without comment. Lift, bind, breathe, return to your place. Underground, patience has teeth. Sappers feel their way in cramped syllables. Tap, scrape, wedge, checking props with a knuckle and a listening tilt of the head. A lamp's flame answers questions about air that no one says aloud. A seam of clay yields a little. A sound changes from hollow to threaded, which means someone else is close. Above, defenders stretch flat and set one ear to stone. The moment a countermine must turn is communicated with the simple authority of a finger, pointed at a spot men have been walking past for hours. When tunnels meet, the conversation is short and made of tools. Later, the soil collapses into itself, polite as a house closing a door. Food is the truce that keeps the wall from becoming only a line of nerves. At noon, a pot appears. Lentils, leek, a scrap of something smoked, and bowls go round with the blessed scarcity that heightens gratitude. Salt tastes like clarity. A wedge of bread becomes a decision to see the afternoon through. The emperor passes, and his words are brief enough to fit in a mouthful of food. Giustiniani stops long enough to insist that two men trade places with two who have stopped blinking normally. No one argues. Rest as ammunition. The line repeats the phrase until it becomes a useful superstition. Afternoons write themselves in layers. A wheeled tower groans forward under hides dark with water. Defenders answer with fire that crawls unexpectedly and hooks that leap like practiced hands. Ladders find the new slope, where yesterday's wall face became today's incline. And time narrows until it is precisely the width of a rung. An archer discovers he can place a shot into the bright gap between two visor slits, if he breathes once on the draw and twice on the release. A sailor, drafted to wall duty, uses knots like sentences, one for a brace that must not slip, another for a lash that must release without splintering. A monk who used to mend sandals patches a glove while its owner watches the field. He bites the end of his thread, ties it, and nods. Another small thing will not fail today. Weather takes turns as a third army. A wind from the Marmara carries dust out of the lungs. Mercy. An hour later it reverses, penance. When rain comes, it is a sermon the wall understands. Dust settles, cracks darken. The rubble slope compacts into something less treacherous. Powder sulks under canvas and must be coaxed with patience and dry cloth. Men sleep harder under rain's steady hand and wake with faces marked by the grid of their cloak folds. In the morning, the patched places look honest, as if water had smoothed the story's exaggerations. Evening is a change of tense. The big guns fall quiet to cool their tempers. Lamplight purls along the parapet. Tools emerge that do not belong in chronicles. Plumb lines, trowels, wooden mauls with worn faces, baskets of sand that pour like time. Masons work by touch where sight is unsure, reading the grain of brick as a miller reads flour. Timber ribs slide into gaps and make a tired wall breathe easier. Sandbags stack into a new anatomy. A boy with a jar of oil moves along hinges and hooks, encouraging metal to behave in the colder hours. Jokes return in domestic sizes. A pun about a crack that only wants attention. A wager on whose patch will still look pretty at sunrise. Across the Horn, the ships hauled overland have become part of the city's dailiness. The way a newscar stops demanding comment, batteries swivel to address them. Watch rotations bend. A messenger learns the new route in his legs. At intervals, the water flares into brief flowers of fire, pitch and daring and a shout that tastes of brass, then closes again, as if the surface had a talent for discretion. People on balconies count heartbeats between light and hiss, and then they go back to the quiet business of placing buckets and folding blankets. Supply becomes ethics. Tar is measured against lamps and traps. Timber is argued over like scripture, with love and exasperation. A ledger appears in a commander's hand, and the line gathers to meet the numbers halfway. A woman with a calm voice settles a dispute about rope by cutting a coil into two fair lengths and keeping the leftover for the first repair that asks for kindness. Men accept the ruling, not because it is perfect, but because the tone makes perfection unnecessary. Near sunset, the Emperor and Giustiniani walk a stretch where the wall's new slope scares everyone a little. They do not try to be immortal, they try to be useful. The Emperor says the names of two tired men and orders them to sleep until moonrise. Giustiniani explains, for the third time this week, the small trick of bracing a timber so it can be knocked free quickly if the face must suddenly shed weight. The repetition does not irritate, it steadies. A mason smiles because he has begun to explain the same thing to his apprentice, gestures and all. Habit is a rope thrown forward in time. Night folds itself along seams. Everyone now knows by touch. The city's sound changes key. Less metal, more cloth. Less command, more request. In Hagia Sophia, a line of song finds its pitch and holds. On the rampart, a sentry reviews the day by naming the tools he used: shovel, trowel, hook, cup. He is surprised at how proud the list makes him. Down in a kitchen, a cook sets a handful of herbs by a pot and breathes in their green as if it were a map. Across the water, drums test the dark once, twice, and then rest. By the last bell, the wall is bandaged for morning. The rubble slope has been combed into a shape that will not betray a foot. The braces tuck their shoulders against tired stone. Buckets are placed where a reaching hand will find them without looking. The chain across the harbour hums to itself in the black water, iron talking in a voice too low for daylight. The city sleeps in pieces, but it sleeps. Let your own breath follow that cadence. Work, repair, rest. Each a verse in the same patient song. The days of thunder and the nights of stitching have brought the hour close. In the next chapter, the argument will narrow to a single door. Ladders and standards at the St. Romanus sector. A captain's wound, a rumour about a gate. The emperor choosing where to stand when standing is the last thing a man can give. We will approach it with the same careful steadying we have used for every small thing, because the largest things are only small things piled high. The last morning comes like a held breath released. 29 May. A thin seam of light along the land, dew lifting from the grasses beyond the walls. Drums speak first, disciplined and steady, more heartbeat than threat. Then the horns, then the layered movement of men shaking sleep from armour and habit. Along the St. Romanus sector, the air already tastes of stone. The rubble slope where the wall's face has sloughed into the ditch sits like a tilted stage, waiting for actors who know their lines by muscle memory. The first wave is the loudest and the cheapest. Irregulars move in a broken rush, more noise than weight, their purpose to pull attention taut and pull arrows out of quivers. They climb, slip, claw at the slope. The defenders answer with stones, with bolts, with the old grammar of spear and hook. The wave breaks and draws back, leaving its churn of shouts and shields against the day's knee. Breath returns to human size for a moment. Men glance left and right, counting faces the way farmers count tools after a storm. The wall still holds its posture. The city takes one collective swallow. The second wave is heavier, more deliberate. Trained troops with shields that know how to lean together. They carry ladders that have been measured against the wall, as if the wall were a man whose height you know. They place them in a rhythm that tries to make chaos look like order. Under the smoke, under the noise, a strange kindness persists. Hands that set a ladder well save the man behind them, a heartbeat of panic on the third rung. On the parapet, Captain Giustiniani keeps his shadow where the breach looks most persuasive. He is not a gesture, he is a method. He sets men where the rubble gives just a little and orders others to hold their fire until the right weight lands on the rung. When a ladder bites, hooks find it. When a shield appears where none should be, an archer who learned to breathe twice on the release uses the trick he taught himself 2 chapters ago. The second wave, too, breaks, less loudly, more stubbornly, and ebbs. Between the second and the third is a pause the histories cannot fully describe. It is long enough for a swallow of water and a fast prayer, long enough for a joke too small to repeat and too large to forget, long enough for Constantine to appear again at the section where everyone's eyes keep returning. He speaks almost nothing now. The words he has left are names, and names are sentences that do their work quickly. He says one, then another, like a man checking the presence of tools he cannot replace. He sets a hand to a shoulder, then to stone, as if both can feel what the other needs. The third wave has many names, but within the city it is felt simply as a decision arriving on legs. The janissaries come forward without waste. Their line a study in obedience to a tempo no one argues with. Drums tighten the air. Ladders go up in the places where the wall has learned to be tired. The rubble slope, patient teacher of the last weeks, becomes suddenly a staircase meant for someone else's feet. The argument narrows until it is the width of a man's chest and the length of his reach. In this tight hour, the city learns a harsh geometry. Giustiniani takes a wound, shot or splinter, history's wrangle. Pain does not, deep enough to change the line of his back and the colour of his face. Men who have built their courage on his steadiness feel the plank underfoot flex. He tries to stay. The body, practical as always, insists otherwise. When he is led away toward the inner city gate, the rumour outruns him. The captain is hurt. The captain is gone. Courage is mostly a patient thing, but it is also a communal thing. For a moment, the wall feels all the private doubts it has been ignoring and discovers they have learned to shout. Under that shout, ladders touch the parapet, where just yesterday hooks had been enough. A banner, red, white, greened with grime, appears on the wrong side of the merlons, then disappears in a spasm of hands, then appears again, as if testing whether the air will hold it. Men fight at a distance measured in breath. A spearhead arrives out of nowhere and leaves just as quickly with some part of a story. The emperor is seen in 3 places at once because need multiplies a ruler's image. The truest site may be near the St. Romanus sector, where he is said to stand stripped of what makes him ceremonial, leaving only what makes him a man. Armor closes around a person like an argument that has given up on adjectives. Toward the Blackerney angle, where wall and palace and new-built works complicate one another, a smaller story grows large. Some chronicles speak of a postern, the Kirke Porter, left unbarred in confusion or boldness, opened by design or accident. Others deny it outright, preferring a simpler, cleaner breach. A ladder that held, a moment when the weight went the wrong way, a slope of rubble that had been patient too many days in a row. The city will argue with itself about this door for centuries, because people wish fate would be legible. But mornings like this one smear ink. Here is a sober truth. Multiple things can be true enough at once to make the same noon. Whether by postern or by parapet, men from the outside find themselves suddenly on the inside in more than one place. The wall, which has felt like a single object through the weeks, becomes a quilt with hands tugging at its seams. Cries fork in 2 directions. From one tower, a trumpet sounds a note that was meant for victory and is used instead for gathering. Along the Lycus Valley, the slope fattens with men climbing and men falling. The chain across the horn, faithful to its single line, can do nothing about the lines that now sprout where there were none. The emperor's last acts are described in words that glow with affection and blur with unknowing. He is said to refuse retreat. He is said to ask forgiveness of those around him. He is said to give it too. He is said to throw away the signs that make him more than a soldier, so that at the final pinch, he will be only a soldier among soldiers. Some say he falls at the breach, some near the gate, some in the press where the rubble slope meets the last intact course. Others say he disappears into the tangle, and that the city keeps his body as a mystery, because mystery is kinder than spectacle. What can be said without embroidery is that Constantine chose proximity when distance would have been easier to defend. A ruler's last sentence is often a verb. His seems to have been stand. Within the wall, streets begin to receive what has crossed over them. The fight changes size, from hundreds to handfuls, from sectors to doorways. A cart tilts into a ditch and becomes a barricade by accident. A woman bolts a door and holds it with both hands, though no one tests it yet. Afterwards, she will swear she felt the pressure of the whole field on that single plank. Boys who ferried water now ferry news, which is to say rumour braided with courage. In Hagia Sophia, the dome gathers voices because the dome has always gathered voices. It does not choose which prayers to make louder. Outside the wall, drums lower their pitch the way men lower their voices when they enter a church. Inside, bells answer with a sound that has the angle of pleading, then of surrender, then of something older than either. The great chain lies across the horn, accepting starlight as if this were any other night. Bronze guns, those new grammarians, sit hot and satisfied, ignorant of what any sentence means beyond its own correctness. There are, even here, small generosities. A soldier pulls a child behind a stair and points to an alley that will still be safe for the next 5 minutes. A wounded man who cannot walk insists on being moved to the side so others can pass where he fell. The insistence makes the corridor wider by some invisible measure. A captain whose name the city will forget tells 2 men to drink before they try the next door. They do, and the next door opens more kindly than it might have. In a siege, mercy is a local weather. By noon, maps and certainties are both smudged. Standards that never meant to stand together share wind. The long argument between stone and bronze has concluded in the only way such arguments conclude, by teaching men how much of the answer was in their hands all along. Some lay those hands down, others lift them again to the new work that follows conquest. Sorting, sparing, commanding, rebuilding, renaming. Breathe with the city one more time as it exhales the last of its old name. The wall has done what a wall can do. The chain has kept faith with its line. The dome still holds sound long enough for grief to recognize itself. The emperor has given his last service in the only currency that never devalues. The day that began with drums will end with orders. Between those two, there is a moment that belongs to no side, only to the human fact of standing together as long as standing is possible. We will rest there on that narrow ledge of time before we step into what comes after. Doors opening to a new rule, the great church meeting a different liturgy, mercy and plunder sharing a street, and a young sultan walking a city he has wanted more than he has hated. The making and unmaking of a capital will ask for the same attention we have given the wall, small acts, exact and repeated, so that we can see how a future begins inside an ending. The doors open inward to a different hour. Along the Lycus and at the breached places near St. Romanus, men cross from outside to inside and find themselves walking streets that have been preparing for them for 1,000 years without ever intending to. The sound changes. Drums lower their voices, commands sharpen and thin. Bells inside the city keep ringing until someone with gentler hands stills them. Dust, which has spent weeks learning only one language, collapse, learns a second, settling. Custom travels as stubbornly as armies. The first hours belong to plunder, according to a law older than most cities. And yet even in this ritualized unmaking, there are pockets of restraint, orders shouted with a different temper, gestures that make room for a quieter future. Doors give under axes. Some are opened from within when a bargain is made. Families flatten themselves against interior walls and learn what it is to measure time by footsteps in a hall. Somewhere, a soldier takes a cup of water from someone who ought to be his fear and returns the cup without taking anything else. It is not a miracle. It is a small weather system of mercy crossing a single room. Hagia Sophia receives the day like a harbour that has seen all winds. People pour toward its doors because they always have when history grows larger than a street can hold. The dome gathers voices, the lilt of prayer, the edge of panic, the steadying tones of those who have learned how to speak calm into a crowd. Lamps sway and spill a little oil. The marble underfoot remembers countless palms of footsteps. When the conqueror arrives, the church is already full of more than one kind of petition. Mehmed enters with the look of someone who has rehearsed the sight. He has wanted the city more than he has hated it. That difference matters now. He orders the building's new life with a decisiveness that is both practical and symbolic. Hagia Sophia becomes a mosque, its dome not silenced, but asked to host another grammar of praise. A prayer is said, a banner placed, and the vast interior learns a new cadence that still respects height and hush. Mosaics linger behind skimmed lime. A mihrab finds its orientation. The floor, which has tolerated empires, tolerates one more. Outside, guards are posted to keep the new threshold from becoming a market of triumph. The city hears that tone and begins to understand how this rule might feel. The conqueror gives limits to the sack and then stops it sooner than some expected. He walks streets no longer as besieger but as chooser. This gate must be mended. This quarter must be spared its fear long enough to find its keys. This official should be found and brought before me with dignity intact. He sends for scholars, for scribes, for men who know where the tax ledgers live and where the aqueduct's logic bends. A different logistics begins, counting heads, not ladders, measuring grain for bread, not for gabions, appointing men who can be obeyed without the friction of constant threat. On another day soon after, he will meet the city in still another voice, one that establishes the rhythm of governance. A patriarch will be appointed, Gennadios Scholarios, to gather the city's orthodox under the new protection, his staff a sign that worship will continue even as liturgy moves to different hours. Muslims, Christians, Jews, each is told the terms by which their worship and their trades will be kept and taxed. The outlines of the millet system, the empire's habit of allowing communities to govern parts of their private law, take on a shape that will endure. This is not romance. It is administration tuned to the realities of a port that speaks many tongues and still expects to understand itself. Repopulation begins as a gentle pressure, then a policy, then a pulse. Registers are opened. Scribes dip their pens and ask names that must be spelled more than one way. Orders go out into Anatolia and the Balkans. Families are to be resettled here, craftsmen, merchants, farmers, clerks, so that a city of stones can become again a city of hands. Some come willingly, tempted by the chance to trade under a ruler whose appetite for building is already a rumour. Others arrive under firmer encouragement. The Surgeon of Empire, moved for the sake of a map. Houses are claimed, repaired, made honest with brooms and buckets. A courtyard that yesterday held fear holds laundry and laughter by the end of the season. The markets relearn their vowels. The harbour finds its old, complicated heartbeat. Names settle like silt. To some, the city remains Constantinople, the Ottoman tongue's courteous bow to its founder. To others, it is simply the city as it has always been. In the mouths of sailors and shopkeepers, another name, Istanbul, the local habit of saying to the city, continues to fatten into common sense. Renaming is never a clean erasure. It is a palimpsest written by many hands at many speeds. Seals and coins speak one way. Lullabies and curses speak another. All of them mean, this is still the place where roots meet the water and the water meets ambition. Within the first years, foundations appear that make ambition visible. On the Acropolis, the old palace gives way to plans for a new seat. Topkapi rising by stages after 1459, a compound of courtyards that teaches ceremony to take long, shaded walks. A kuliye, mosque, school, kitchen, hospital, will carry the Sultan's chosen name, Fatih, and feed both bodies and ideas. The Grand Bazaar finds its beginnings in vaulted rooms, where voices learn the lively echo of commerce. Each project lays down not just stone, but policy. Endowments, waqfs, that feed scholars and soup pots. Taxes that grow regular. Judges who learn the streets as well as the benches. A city is built twice, once by masons and once by clerks. The old chain across the Horn is taken up and stored, not as an insult to its stubbornness, but as a recognition that the harbour's sentence has changed punctuation. New docks are planned. Towers that once glared at one side of history are instructed to face a wider horizon. The fortress upriver that once pinched the strait now serves as a stern usher for trade, and caravans arriving from the interior find a port eager to turn silk, wax and grain into coin. Guilds negotiate their pecking order. Scribes argue about weights and measures with a civility earned at great cost. Inside houses that survive the hour, the work is domestic and enormous. Icons are taken down with reverence in some rooms and wrapped in cloth. In others, niches are cleaned and rugs laid where prostration will be comfortable. A Jew who fled an earlier trouble in the West unlocks a shop shutter and finds a clientele that already understands bargaining as a form of greeting. A Greek scribe copies a prayer into a new hand and discovers the muscle remembers even when the mind is tired. An Armenian metalworker tests a hinge and smiles at the clean swing. Small trades make large governments plausible. Mehmed walks again through Hagia Sophia, pausing where the light falls in its old way. The building's grandeur has learned to serve a different articulation of devotion, yet the generosity of space remains. People come and go without being told to whisper. The dome, with its experienced patience, reduces everyone's voice to a human scale. The conqueror's pride is obvious, so is his sense of stewardship. He speaks, from time to time, of making this city the mirror that will show his empire its own face. Mirrors require polish, and polish requires hands and time. Orders go out for both. Not all is soft. Laws are posted. Some houses are raised to make streets straight enough for parades that teach obedience. A few old privileges are retired with a ceremony that feels to the retired like discourtesy. Taxes appear where before there were excuses. Yet the firmness is tempered by something more than appetite. Mehmed wants a capital that can outlast his own weather. He courts scholars, invites painters, argues with architects, orders histories, and reads them. The city begins to belong as much to his mind as to his armies. In the quieter quarters, grief takes its walks in the evenings. Women who lost husbands to the breach sit together and sew, their talk practical until it isn't. Men who lost captains recalibrate their voices in conversation, loud where once they deferred, gentle where once they joked. Children learn new routes to water and to markets and discover that a city is simply a set of paths you are allowed to take without thinking. Memory becomes a citizen with rights. The right to tell stories that do not flatter anyone. The right to keep a saint's day with fewer candles. The right to nod toward a house that is not there anymore, and finish the sentence under your breath. By autumn, the smell of lime is less harsh. By spring, scaffolds become less a sign of injury than of habit. The city has begun its second education. The empire that arrived by siege teaches itself to arrive by schedule. Taxes at month's end, judgments on a court day, ships at dawn with flour and fish, a school bell in a quarter that did not have one last year. Those who feared only the hammer find themselves answering unexpectedly to the pen. Stand a moment in the square where the hippodrome once breathed games and factions. It is quieter now, but even quiet keeps a pulse. Sellers call in a cadence that belongs to ports, not to palaces. A man from the mountains buys a length of rope cut to a fair arm span and leaves satisfied with the transaction and the city. On a balcony above, a woman waters basil and listens to a boatman singing a tune that was not heard here before the summer. She hums the second line by instinct. This is how capitals renew themselves, one borrowed melody at a time. Let your breath ease with the city's new rhythm. Work set to bells rather than to blasts. Prayers at different hours that still send up the same old human requests. The last night of Rome has passed into the first morning of something else, and the streets have taken to it with the same resilience they showed in fear. Our vigil now turns from rooms and orders to echoes and inheritances. What this fall taught lands beyond the straits, what it moved along trade routes and into libraries, and how a city's ending can begin again as a lantern carried forward. Across the straits and far beyond them, the fall of the city becomes a travelling weather. News crosses water faster than ships sometimes, carried in the mouths of merchants and envoys who know how to make a sentence land. In Europe, church bells toll and writers reach for phrases big enough to hold 1,000 years ending. In Anatolia and the Balkans, men take the measure of a young sultan whose patience and appetite have just been proven true. Some reactions are practical. Reroute a cargo, write a letter, tighten a border. Others are devotional. Fasts, prayers, proclamations that try to turn bewilderment into purpose. A city's last night does not stay local for long. From the conquered streets to the courts of distant princes, manuscripts become boats. Greek scholars who leave with trunks of texts slip into Italian cities that have been waiting, secretly, for exactly this cargo. Grammar teachers and copyists arrive with Homer and Plato, with commentators whose footnotes are themselves small continents. They bring a way of arguing that favours clarity and a way of reading that does not fear the old. Humanism, already sprouting in the cracks of Latin schools, finds a river to drink from. A Florentine boy learns to write a cleaner sentence because a refugee insists on the right preposition in the right place. This is not spectacle. It is carpentry of mind. Trade changes key. For a while, spice routes suddenly feel like strings tuned by a new hand. Phoenician and Genoese ledgers blink, revise, and blink again. Levies at the straits teach shipmasters new arithmetic. In counting rooms where sunlight pools on abacus beads, the cost of pepper and silk and dye pushes minds westward. A Genoese mariner with a head full of maps and a name that will become a lesson, Cristoforo Colombo, goes shopping for patrons by promising a way around problems he cannot solve by pleading. This is an oversimple origin story for voyages that had many fathers: ambition, money, curiosity, sheer stubbornness, but this morning of 1453 sits in the stack. On the fields where walls once settled arguments, bronze keeps talking. Gunners and engineers write their own quiet manifestos in timber and earth. The lesson is unromantic and exact. Stone that stands beautifully against ladders does not reason well with focused thunder. Across Europe, city councils think in angles and ditches. Architects learn to lower pride and parapet alike. Bastions fatten, faces slant. The new style of fortress, star-shaped, humble in height but rich in geometry, begins to scribble itself across maps. Old masonry hasn't failed. It has finished a chapter. Artillery, for its part, learns manners, calibrations, carriages, crews with recipes instead of slogans. War takes on more math and more logistics, which is to say, more lists, ropes, wedges, wheels. In the orthodox world, the shock runs deeper than policy. A patriarch is appointed under new auspices. The millet pattern takes hold, arranging religious communities into something like households under one roof, each with its own corner and chores. In Russia, a phrase blooms that will outlast the men who coined it. Third Rome. It is a wish and a claim, a way for a far city to warm itself by the embers of another's last fire. Titles migrate, ideas try on new clothes. The word Rome refuses to retire. It simply finds another tongue to do its old work of naming centrality. Mehmed takes a title that is as much thesis as ornament, Kaiser I Rum, Caesar of Rome, and means it in the active voice. He is not borrowing grandeur, he is arguing genealogy. Coins and firmans say it in official metal and ink, buildings say it in stone and shadow. The empire that now gathers its weight around the Bosporus will carry that Roman claim for centuries, sometimes lightly, sometimes as a burden that insists on campaigns at distances maps advise against. A capital is a kind of sentence that each ruler rewrites without erasing what came before. Mehmed's draft is confident and legible. Libraries absorb the event in their own way. In Istanbul, texts are gathered and commissioned, translation becomes statecraft, and scholars learn the contented exhaustion of being paid to argue well. In Italy, presses, those new hives of noise and letter, begin to hum louder. Greek trickles into type. Latin steps more cleanly because it has a better partner to lean on. A printer in Venice sets a page and thinks for a moment of a city he has never seen, a dome he has only heard described, a chain across the water recast in iron type as a line of dashes. Books make distances soluble. Theologies take care to keep their proportions. Sermons declare tragedies as warnings, consolations, exhortations. Some preachers speak as if maps are morals. Others, a little wiser, remind listeners that empires are weather and that piety must learn to stand in rain as well as sun. In the mosques rising under the new crescent, imams teach gratitude for victory without forgetting humility before a Lord who is not impressed with banners. Hagia Sophia, patient pedagogue, trains both communities in acoustics that do not favour shouting. Among ordinary people, those who patch shoes, tally barrels, scrub steps, inheritance is simpler. A girl in Galata learns to bargain one word at a time in a tongue she did not need last year. Soon she is better at it than her uncle. A Greek baker in the Farnar quarter alters a recipe after a neighbour from Bursa brings a different spice. The loaf becomes a quiet treaty. A Jewish physician opens a practice near the market. His waiting room collects languages the way a cloak collects smells from a kitchen. Cities do not forget how to mix. The legend-making begins immediately because humans need stories that human hands can carry. A postern left unbarred becomes a parable about attention or fate, depending on the teller's mood. The emperor's last stand becomes a mirror people hold up when they want to see bravery without boasting. A prophecy about a city taken and retaken circulates in more than one tradition. It is vague enough to be useful and specific enough to make a chill run pleasantly along the back of the neck. Over time, ballads and chronicles braid. The ballads win in kitchens. The chronicles win in courts. And both misunderstand one another beautifully. Some things do end. The Byzantine bureaucracy, durable, ingenious, sometimes comic in its confidence that forms could improve reality, finally closes its ledgers. Titles that once made gentlemen straighten their backs grow light and drift down like dry leaves. Certain ceremonies walk to the edge of the water, bow, and do not return. And yet much does not end. In the neighbourhoods, the grammar of living, fetch water, mend cloth, teach a boy to read, help a neighbour carry a bundle up a stair, continues with the serene arrogance of habit. Capitals change names. Errands keep their roots. Look back from a later century and the outlines are crisp. An empire closes, another widens. Trade routes slide a little. Ships push into larger oceans. Fortifications lose height and gain science. A city that once introduced itself as the queen of one world learns to be the hub of another. The shock of 1453 does not explain everything that comes after. Nothing ever does, but it is a reliable hinge. Lean on it, and the door swings wide enough to show a room where Renaissance argument fattens. Ottoman administration proves its appetite for long schedules, and Europe begins to imagine itself by drawing lines around the unknown and then sailing through them. We return, gently, to the last night because that is where the scale feels right for sleep. A mother smoothing a child's hair, a mason laying a brace by lamplight, a soldier sharing water with someone he will never see again. These gestures are the smallest coins. They purchase sanity in any currency. The city that taught Rome to speak Greek and domes to float on light also taught this. Endurance is made of ordinary hands doing unfinished work. If your eyes are heavy, let them close. The chain rests. The dome holds. The strait keeps moving ships from one sea to another, as if empires were merely weather. Somewhere a scribe finishes a line and sands it smooth. Somewhere a captain sets down a helmet and becomes a father again. Somewhere a ruler looks at a map and feels the complicated pride of stewardship. The past does not sleep, but it does lie quietly when asked. Breathe once more with the city's long rhythm. Build, mend, pray, trade, teach, remember. The last night of Rome has become a morning that belongs to many names, and the story has learned to speak all of them softly. Good night.